Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique glancing salute and some of the more important principles, theories, concepts, rules, and strategies of this technique. So let's start out with a strategy. That's where we like to start, usually because that's pretty important. So what's happening here? The guy's pushing us. This is an in-flight minor, but then it makes contact with us, so it gets into a gray area of being applied or in flight, but we won't worry about that. But what are we doing? What we're trying to do here, strategy-wise, is to control zones, get our majors into the rear, keep control over them, and then, now that we've got control over them, hit them with our majors. In this case, short-range majors. So now that we've got the general strategy, keep in mind, everything from this point forward is basically to finish that strategy or implement that strategy. Okay? So let's talk about the beginning salvo and how we have to start considering things. Consideration number one is extremely important here. Environment. So environment is anything that's in, on, or around us. Okay? So in this case, let's talk about things that are around us. For instance, a closed environment. That's what we generally call something when you have a wall behind you or you're in an environment where you really can't move very much. So in this case, why is it important? Because if they're pushing us, we're not going to be able to step back. We're going to be forced to step forward. Okay? So if we were to open up the environment, in other words, get rid of that wall, we now have a choice. We could either step back or step forward, right? So why do we choose one over the other? Well, let's take another thing in our environment, our opponent. How aggressive are they? We're going to be reading that situation. If they're overly aggressive, guess what? We're probably going to be compelled to step back, okay? If it's not overly aggressive and they're just kind of pushing us, almost like a friendly jabbing push, we can choose. We can continue to step backwards or we can decide to step forward. And that's purposeful. So we have purposeful and compelled. Compelled meaning we have to do it. Purposeful meaning we can decide and choose to do it, okay? So in this case, we read the situation and it doesn't really matter. We step back, but now we're starting to implement that strategy. So the strategy here is to control the zones. So this is extremely important on how we're going to do this. So we need to control these zones. So we have this hand here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start creating points in space in order to help us control these zones. So in this case, we're going to fix this hand to our body, and then we have to worry about that second point and that third point, because in order to control zones, a lot of times you have to have 3 points in space. So in this case, we've got the one that we can guarantee, and now we have to worry about this one, which is relatively fixed. But let's walk into how it's not fixed and how it can run into a problem here. If I'm trying to control this zone, the angle in which I go dictates whether that remains fixed or not. So for instance, if I go in the horizontal, guess what? They can just move their body with it, and that means that's not fixed anymore. Yes, I had these 2 points, but I didn't get that third point. So how do I solve for that? So what I do is I change the line. So in this case, all I have to do is go up at a diagonal, and guess what? Yes, instead of going that way, it's now going up, and they can only go up so far, so I can continue to control those zones that I needed, right? So now that I've got those zones under control, I want to keep my control over this guy, right? We've got it, let's keep it, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to push that hand against their body so that we can obey the rule that says don't leave any loose extremities, keep them under check. So in this case, what am I doing? I'm checking the arm by pushing it against them, but kind of also checking off that right leg, which are their majors. But again, just like this line here, we can create a wrong thing to happen by choosing a wrong line. So in this case, if I just kind of move that hand out of the way, what happened here? There's a general idea that says, don't start an orbit that's going to reorbit back to hit you. And by changing the line so that it goes on this line rather than to the body, I started an orbit that's going to reorbit back to hit me, which I don't want to do. So make sure that you go on this proper angle, just like this proper angle, to keep them under check. Now, what do we got? We got our majors in the rear. Great for us, right? So now we can start taking advantage of this opponent and start hitting them. So now this first hit is really important. So keep in mind, the major power principle we're using here is backup mass. And backup mass is made possible through alignments. Okay, so in this case, we don't want a chicken wing. We want to keep that elbow anchored as we do this hit. Okay, that gives us his bracing angles. another concept to bring in. But another really important concept at this point is whether we're doing a glancing angle or an angle of incidence. Yes, the name of this technique is glancing salute, but we're really not doing a glancing hit. We're doing a angle of incidence, not a glancing angle. And then what we're going to do is use a pivot point in order to grab them. So in other words, instead of hitting and glancing, I'm going to use my hand, we're going to hit and then wrap around so that we can hit them. So we get the hit, the angle of incidence, and all we've done is change it to a wrap or a pivot point of our wrist to get behind them. Okay? So we've got that hit, and then we wrap around to grab, and then we're doing opposing forces to do the elbow, and then ending up, or the knee, and then ending up with the elbow. Okay? So the reason why I didn't do that, because I want to talk through that before I get to that. So here's another extremely important concept here. We are just doing a step through. That's the way you want to think about it. We're stepping through. We are not elbowing and then continuing forward. We're using continuous motion. Okay, so the way you want to think about this is that it is an exaggerated step. So in other words, you're just stepping forward, and you're going to deliver this elbow, but you're going to insert the knee in the middle of it. So it's just an exaggerated step. Okay, so let's walk through how that is. So we keep this check here, we get this wraparound, and what we're going to do is pull and hit. Okay, so that brings in one final concept for us, which is the compact unit. Remember we were talking about backup mass and alignments. Well, when we're using short-range weapons, we have to bring in a new concept called compact units. Yes, the alignments pretty much stay the same, but compact units change things with our weapon formation. In this case, for the upper end, what we want to do is we want to make sure we bring our hand close to our body, and we want to keep it on the outside of our center line. Okay? And that creates that compact units on the top end. For the bottom end, what we want to do is point our toes and then bend our knee just like we bent our elbow, and that creates compact units in order to make energy transfer into their body a little bit better. So now that we've talked through all these different concepts, let's actually execute the technique just so you can see it being performed. Okay, up. Hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.